Hello, we will be starting our session shortly. Please use the chat to ask questions and share comments. If needed, you can turn on automatic captions that will be in your settings on the call. It's usually the triple dot, and once turned on, you can choose between English, Portuguese, or Spanish. I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Rebecca Karen, and I am the event planner of Microsoft Reactor New York. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly review a couple of items, our code of conduct and the event guidelines. The Microsoft is dedicated to empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. This includes Microsoft Reactor events where we seek to provide a respectful, friendly, professional experience for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, physical appearance, disability, age, race, or religion. We do not tolerate any behavior that is harassing or degrading to any individual in any form. Individuals are responsible for knowing and abiding by these standards. We encourage everyone to assist in creating a welcoming and safe environment. So please keep, your comments in the chat and your questions asked on topic. Today's session will be recorded. You will not, as the audience, be in the video. This is strictly for the speakers today that will be there. We will add that video to our YouTube channel. I will share the link to the future recording on demand shortly into the chat. If you have questions or comments, they are welcome. Please drop them into the chat as well. At the end of the session, we will have a Q&A opportunity. Again, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, closed captioning is available. To turn it on, click on the CC or live caption icon at the top of your screen and select your language preference. Today's session will cover the state of the VC ecosystem in Latin America and Brazil. This event is part of a series of workshops promoted in partnership by IFC and Microsoft with the support of We Ventures and We Impact, with the objective of fostering women entrepreneurship. This event will be a moderated debate with an opportunity, again, as mentioned, for a Q&A session at the end. Today's moderator will be Marcela Siva. She's the Chief Investment Officer with We Ventures. We will have two speakers debating topics today. We have Alexander Darze, a financial market venture capital professional, joining us, and Stefan Darling, investor with the International Finance Corporation. At this time, I will let Marcela take over and begin running the session.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's a great pleasure to be here. Hi, Alex. Hi, Stefan. How are you?
I'm good. Great to be here today.
Hi, Marcela. Good to see you again. Thanks for the invitation.
It's a great pleasure to have you guys. I think we should jump right to it. We will be looking here into the state of venture capital in Latin America, and we've put together a few questions to guide our conversation. But we can definitely go off topic as well, however you prefer. Let's start it off with this first question. How has Latin American VC ecosystem been impacted by COVID-19 on both the financing side and the performance of companies? So I think this is a very appropriate question for our moment, the moment we've been living. I'd like really to understand from your perspective how you see this did impact our ecosystem and how and why. We can start with, let's start with Alex, letter A. We'll go alphabetically today.
No, great. Well, if you look at what's actually happening in Brazil on the VC space, on the funding side, a number of VC deals. Actually, 2020 was a very good year, despite of the COVID impact. If you look at what's going on in 2021, the first quarter of 2021 is another very good year. 2021, we have almost half in terms of the volume invested in 2020 already done in a relatively broad number of deals. So in terms of the amount of money, liquidity, and number of transactions, apparently VCs, we continue with a great appetite for Brazilian startups. If you take a look at the portfolio, so the startups per se, and I can talk about the startups that I have within my own portfolio, but also a broader perspective on what's going on in Brazil. Of course, you have companies that were very negatively impacted by the COVID, that for sure. On the other spectrum, companies where the COVID and especially the change in the behavior of industries, right, in the conduct of some industries, those companies were actually accelerated by the COVID. The whole thing around digital transformation, digitalization, it really happened, and you can see that clearly in some specific sectors and some specific businesses. Overall, and when I say overall, I mean trying to put this on a package, see what really happened with valuations and etc. It really depends on the portfolio composition, but what I saw here at Lighthouse, also with some other funds that we do have co-investments or close relationships, that overall those portfolios are on average performing relatively well. So it's very difficult to say that in a situation from a health perspective, also from a perspective sanitaria that is terrible. I never ever experienced anything close to this in my entire life. It's hard to say, but those portfolios and the overall VC and startup space, at least in Brazil, I think somehow benefited from this tough moments that the economy and us as a society we're facing.
That's definitely an interesting perspective. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I did read that 2020 was an exceptional year in terms of amount of investments in Latin America. So Stefan, if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear your side of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with the comments that were mentioned by Alex. I think within our portfolio at the IFC, as well as the companies that are in our pipeline, I think we saw a similar trend in terms of the acceleration of various sectors. I think, while COVID-19 was incredibly negative for a number of reasons, and you think about the health impact, I think the positive is that it has allowed for a number of companies to have an increased ability to prove the value proposition that they have to offer, especially on the B2B side. I think we've seen a number of companies who are focused on digital transformation, whether it's trying to put forward software for the better management of the workforce, or other types of e-commerce businesses. I think you've seen that not just in Brazil, but also it's Spanish speaking in Latin America as well. I think with that, Latin America, even more so than in 2019, which at that time was a record year for venture capital financing in the region, you're seeing more folks who are beginning to show increased interest in the Latin American VC sector, where not only are U.S. investors starting to think about getting exposure to the region for the first time, but you're also seeing a lot of local Brazilian as well as Latin American funds who are raising outsized fund sizes, which I think is a stamp of approval for what is yet to come in the Latin American context.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. These are, at least there has to be some good side to everything that's going on, right? For all the sad news related to health. I mean, it's motivating to say the least, and we do see some activity going on in our venture capital market. It's something has to make us glad. Okay, now let's start with Stefan. What are some of the key trends that you expect to see over the next 6 to 12 months in Latin America? You can definitely continue on from COVID from your perspective, but build on what you expect to see in the next year, please.
So I think the first thing, I think I'm going, what we expect at IFC is for a continued interest of international firms to be focused on the Latin American landscape. I think what we would hope for that to be accompanied by is for a deeper concentration in seed funds, because we think that's where the major gap in the market has existed historically and still exists today. I think when you look outside of Brazil, it's unfortunate because when a lot of promising entrepreneurs need to raise money, I think their only options are either family offices, which may not be as well equipped to provide portfolio management. And then you also have a number of high net worth individuals who also may be very stressed with their time in terms of providing the hands-on support that a lot of these early stage founders would need. And so I think the role for organizations like the IFC and other developmental institutions is to figure out how can we continue to fund a number of local fund managers to ensure that within the domestic economy, there's enough capital to fund the entire cycle of venture capital within Brazil and within Latin America. I think in terms of specific sectors that we have seen developed recently, I think one, there's been a reemergence of B2B SaaS platforms, especially those that are focused on SME enterprises, which principally allow them to play and be able to compete in a more level playing field with some of the larger enterprises. I think we're also seeing a number of B2B marketplaces that are helping to provide a certain level of efficiency for the sourcing of SME businesses, whether that's SME mom and pop convenience stores, whether that's SME restaurants, whether that's SME hotels. And I think that's going to also further increase the level of professionalization that we see in the SME side, which also has a very positive developmental impact, given the fact that the majority of job creation in Latin America really comes from the small and medium-sized businesses. And then I would say the third thing in terms of a trend that we think will continue is looking at various verticals to support the online economy. For example, I think in Brazil, for example, we have a number of very prominent e-commerce businesses. You have Mercado Libre, you have Magazine Luiza, and what you need now is for different startups to develop infrastructure to support the development of e-commerce, so whether that's last mile delivery, whether that's both focused on fulfillment and warehousing the solutions. So I think we're going to start moving away from the first degree of entrepreneurship and start thinking about the second and third degree, where we're trying to create infrastructure plays to support various sectors, as well as thinking about back of the office software as well.
Thank you, Stefan. That was something that we definitely did. It was beautiful to watch from here, from our perspective, seeing those really small local businesses in Brazil being able to become digital, and also watching closely the startup companies that facilitated that movement. It was something very amazing to see, and we definitely expect to see that in the coming future. I'd also point out in Brazil, we had a specific regulation for medicine, for telemedicine, and I think this is a real game changer here. Along with all regulatory changes, whenever something comes along, obviously, it's a great deal for businesses, but that's something that I really saw happen here as well. Alex, what do you see?
Yeah, no, I mean, I also agree with Stefan. I think if you do this recorte Brasil, Marcelo, as you started to do, we will see an increase on liquidity. Because Brazil is becoming really one of the most interesting tech markets in the world. Not only producing technology but also consuming a lot of technology. So this will clearly drive more liquidity to this country. On the macro level, this might also help when you look at interest exchange rates. So Brazil is still a very interesting place for foreigners to come. So I think in that sense, liquidity from global funds will continue to come in. But on the liquidity side, the most interesting part is that we see a lot of local liquidity popping up. You know, if I move back to my days where I was working for IFC 10 years ago, and you were looking for VCs, local VCs, you would count very few investment houses. Now we have more than 100, according to a number that I saw in a report. It's a lot, you know, and this is good. You see that growing and growing not only in volume, but growing in how could I say, in the expertise side. Very, very good people doing extremely well in investing in the startups. So that to me is a very positive thing. Another one, and Marcela is directly involved in this. You see a lot of CVCs having a more and more relevant role in Brazil, you know? And in some sectors with a huge appetite for early investing, for acquisition. So this, I think, will continue to develop, is also very positive for the startups. Another positive movement that we see in Brazil, and we saw that in other more mature VC markets, is that it is becoming to decentralize. You know? This is no longer a thing that happens in Faria Lima in São Paulo. It is also happening in the south of Brazil. It's also happening in the northeast of Brazil. And this is a trend that will increase, and it's here to stay. You know? So that's another very positive, because you reduce a lot of the asymmetry that geography puts in the way of an entrepreneur. You know, that's another positive thing. So this is all good news for the entrepreneurs. On the startup side, which is also a great thing, more sophisticated companies, stronger teams, you know, much more mature. So in that sense, it is also great for the whole economy, but it gives a sign for whoever is entering this space and is planning to start a new company. The bar is no longer here. The bar is here, you know, in terms of competition, in terms of expectation. You know? So, but overall, I think the years to come are quite promising for both for investors and also for entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I definitely share that opinion. And I'd like to tag along in some of the stuff you said, and then start with your local perspective, and then shift on to Stevon's foreign perspective. But you see, this we have seen, LAVCA has stated a few times that foreign investments in general in the Latin American region has more than doubled every year from 2016 until 2019. And we currently see around 20 unicorns in Latin America. So from your local perspective, I understand from what you said that you do see that the world is kind of waking up to the opportunity existing in Brazil. I think maybe it was facilitated by the pandemic or not, but something that I always think is the breaking of the regionalization. So within Brazil, we're starting to see entrepreneurs in the Northeast, in the North, and the Southern region. In the States, I understand it has also escaped a little bit from the Silicon Valley. So considering Brazil is not the largest technology hub in the world, but do you think foreign investors are now seeing Brazil as Brazil and Latin America specifically as a big potency in the venture capital industry? You're muted, Alex.
Is it now okay?
Good, there you go.
No, definitely. Actually, if you move back again 10, 12 years ago, the whole fintech wave that we saw was actually funded by global funds, you know, like QED, like Ribbit, like IFC. We had very few local players really entering in this fintech wave. It changed a lot. We now have a layer of local funds growing from pre-seed, seed, Series A, B, C, and D. And we also see in those rounds an important portion of the funding coming from outside of Brazil, especially on those more fat rounds. If you look at the round that Sérgio Furio from Creditas he raised, a lot of that money comes from global funds. So this to me will continue to happen and will actually increase. When you start looking at Series B, C, D, E, F, companies are no longer going public; they keep private, and the series are not stopping. That money will continue to come largely from the big pockets outside of Brazil.
Good, thank you. And Stephen, coming from outside of Brazil, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that there are potentially a number of factors that's leading to the international investors to take a deeper look at what's happening in Brazil and the rest of Latin America. I think one, for a very long time, pre-2015, the big question for venture capitalists in the region is, will there ever be a moment for early stage investors to monetize their investment through an exit, whether it's an IPO or a strategic M&A? I think over the last, call it 18 to 20 months, you've seen a number of these large exits, both in the U.S. public markets as well as in the local Brazilian stock exchange. And you're also seeing a lot of strategic investors becoming a bit more acquisitive in trying to figure out how to outsource their innovation through strategic acquisitions. So I think that's giving a lot of international investors comfort in that if they were to get exposure to a Brazilian asset or a Mexican asset, that they would one day be able to have a very strong return, not just on paper, but also in terms of return of capital to their fund. I think the second thing that is also connected with this wave of international capital into Brazil and in the region is, in conjunction with those large exits, you're seeing a lot more people who are becoming less risk averse. Less people after graduating from college are deciding to work for a Fortune 500 company, and they wanted to take a risk and work for a new fast-growing startup and use that as an opportunity for them to develop very strong skills so they can then go and take to start their own enterprise. So I think the pool of opportunities to invest in is also much larger. And then I think the third thing, which is potentially leading to an increase of the influx of foreign capital, is when you think of a lot of the U.S. funds, I think the market there is very competitive. I spoke to a friend the other day where he mentioned in the U.S., most top startups are getting term sheets after 3 calls, so in little as a week. And so I think a lot of the good funds in the U.S. are realizing that there's a lot of capital chasing fewer number of startups in their home market. And at the same time, they're realizing that they can also get really good returns in a region which is a bit similar and a bit known to them. So I think all those factors combined is causing a lot of the U.S. investors to start thinking very seriously about getting exposure to Brazil and the rest of Latin America.
Great, thank you, Stephen. We're getting follow-up questions on what you're saying live, so I'm just going to try to pop them up in here and incorporate it in somehow. The first one was, why are investors interested in increasing their exposure in Latin America if local economies were so negatively affected by the pandemic and the fiscal performance of Latin America countries is not really good right now? What do you guys think? Alex, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can give a first try. When you're entering in this VC space, this is a really long journey. So when you look at the crisis that you expect to have a huge impact in the short run, but in the long run, right, the upside that you get from such investment kind of how do you say this, compensate for those crises. You continue to invest, you know, and I think that's exactly the situation. And also something that we talked earlier, you know, the pandemic had a huge impact on the economies. Look at what is happening in Brazil as the GDP of Brazil in the last year and what will happen this year. But despite of that, this asset class, you know, startups, they are apparently responding super well to the COVID crisis. So from that sense, the fundamentals and the basics, the principles, no, that make an investor come to Brazil and allocate part of its capital remains despite of the crisis. And maybe you were actually having your capital efficiency increasing because of this whole digitalization thing that is happening, and that was boosted somehow by the pandemic. You know, so maybe that's that's a part of the explanation for that.
Yeah, the only point that I'll add there is, I think one part of it is, you know, investors are really, you know, hopefully doing, you know, bottoms up analysis where they're thinking about what are the inherent problems that countries and economies are facing. And are these problems that are just temporary, or things that will potentially be there for the long term, where you need to have some type of technological solution to solve it? I think while COVID obviously did impact global economy significantly, I think it doesn't really change the underlying thesis that many of these sectors have. So I think that the long-term play and the long-term necessity for certain types of technological solutions is going to be here for decades to come. And then I think the second thing, which is especially interesting to Brazil, vis-a-vis some of the other countries in Latin America, such as Mexico or Colombia, I think because of the makeup of the Brazilian economy, because of certain types of regulations, I think that causes for the need of certain types of solutions that are very specific to the Brazilian economy, where you cannot, you know, realistically assume that a U.S. player is doing something that is similar, and then that can eventually expand to the Brazilian market. So I think that makes investing in Brazil so much more exciting, because you do have an opportunity to invest in businesses where you need to have a very strong level of local knowledge. And the best way to get exposure to that as an investor is backing someone who knows the Brazilian market very well.
Brazil is definitely a different market, right? I remember when I first started here in investment banking, they used to have this playbook issued by the central bank, if I'm not wrong, entitled Doing Business in Brazil. And it was in English, available to all foreigners, so they could really understand what it was like to do business in Brazil. It is a whole different animal. We're very happy to have foreign investors still interested in our dynamic economy. Okay, moving on to the follow-up questions. I think this one was kind of covered by what you said, but we can just try to complement it somehow if you'd like. Is there a logic that differentiates the drivers of venture capital investments from the mainstream investments when it comes to economic cycles? Is that why 2020 was a good year in the VC space? Stephen, if you'd like to start, or Alex.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest difference, I think, is really the stage of these enterprises. I think the benefit that a lot of startups have, and that benefited them during COVID, is the fact that they are early stage, the fact that the thesis of the investment did not change drastically because of COVID, And thirdly, because they have a group of venture capitalists who are backing them, who still believe in the mission of the business, who have already invested millions of dollars and would like to bridge these businesses to ensure that they have a fighting chance to carry out their vision. So I think that's one difference between potentially why some venture-backed companies have a better opportunity of surviving COVID versus non-venture-backed companies. I think also at last year, when you're thinking about larger enterprises, the public market was really restricted for a lot of late-stage companies as well. I think the second point for me, which explains why so many startups were able to survive the COVID pandemic. I think it was really a case of what does the downside case level of defensibility look like for a lot of these startups. And I think it also speaks to why so many investors in the early stage would prefer companies that are more asset light versus capex intensive, because you're able to weather tough economic cycles such as what we experienced last year and continue to experience right now. I think unfortunately that did come at a certain expense where certain companies did have to downsize their workforce, which has a strong social impact, not just in Brazil but also in other markets. But I think at the other side, as it was mentioned earlier, it creates opportunities for other startups. To give a great example, we invested in a business in Brazil called Havelo, which was started as a business focused on domestic hiring, all technology based, so they're trying to intermediate the offline headhunter market. And what they discovered because of COVID is that there is a very strong demand in the US, in Western Europe, for very strong and intelligent people in other markets, such as Brazil, to be able to complement their tech workforce or complement other parts of the HR payroll. And so I think a number of technology companies are agile enough to be able to recognize when new opportunities can arise out of a terrible situation. And I think that's really a result of how founders think and how quick founders and the management team are able to react to certain situations.
Marcelo, just really one quick note, and not underestimating the impact of economic cycles. But if you map the risks when we're planning to invest in a startup, especially in the early days. When I say early days, I'm going to maybe Series A, eventually Series B. There are so many risks, and they are basic in the sense of validation, right? Saying we do have a business, because in the early days you have almost a bet, a lot of hypotheses that you will have to confirm or not. Those risks, they do have such a magnitude, and that company operates in a kind of a small spectrum in a sector that is huge, with a problem that is also super painful, that the economic cycle problem is not, I would say, is not one of the main risk drivers of that investment. So that is another perspective that is good. Of course, if your perspective in the very long run is very negative, there is no economic dynamic, very unlikely that the VC space will grow. That's not the case in LAC. What we are seeing is a severe crisis, but again, the fundamentals are still there. So I really think that we will continue to see the same dynamic and the same positive results on the VC investments.
Thank you. That sounds fantastic. That's something that makes Brazil this exciting to invest in, right? At least that's what I believe. I've been an investor here for around almost 15 years, and I've seen almost 10 years with no IPOs. And then all of a sudden we have these changes in juros, and now we see a big flow of IPOs. I think I think Bloomberg posted around 11 billion in exits in the past years. We just seen getting ninjas now. So let's talk a little bit about exit opportunities. That's something that always fuels some spark. Has the market of IPOs and strategic sales for startups increased over the last few years? What's needed to improve this outlook? We know that Brazil has a different behavior. How does this behave in Latin America in the general? What do you guys think, Stefan?
No, I mean, I definitely concur that the rate of IPOs have increased dramatically over the past few years. I think it's also positive to note that there has been an increasing acceptance of IPOs on local stock exchanges in Brazil as well, which may not necessarily equate to a valuation of plus $1 billion, but I think that there's still a sizable amount of opportunities for liquidity in the several $100 million range, which would have a very strong return for early investors. I think obviously one part of that is for international investors to get increased confidence in terms of what the legality of different rights on the local Brazilian public markets look like. So I think that has happened through education and through more experience. I think secondly, it has partially been accelerated as a number of the first and second generation of venture capital funds in Brazil have tried to create actual tangible results in terms of returns of capital in order to go on to raise their subsequent second and third funds. I think that has also been helpful in getting more liquidity. And I think that the third thing for me, given the fact that we at IFC, from a Latin American context, we invest both in Brazilian assets as well as assets in Spanish-speaking Latin America, I think the sense that I have is that one, high net worth individuals on the retail side of public market investing, as well as a lot of the institutions, be it local pension funds, be it family offices, be it the large banks in Brazil, are much more comfortable investing in a local Brazilian stock market versus what I'm seeing in Mexico as well as Colombia, where their forms of diversity is investing in the New York Stock Exchange. So for me, I think those are probably the 3 or 4 factors that has led to an increase in IPOs in the past few years.
Well, Marcela, here, as you, I'm super happy to see this IPO wave, and I hope it's here to stay. This should be a long cycle of positive IPOs, though we do have some mixed results on some of the IPOs that we are seeing this year. But that's, for me, something relatively new. In my professional life, I don't think I ever saw anything like this happening, which is great. The other thing that we see also, providing liquidity for founders and also for VCs, are on the M&A side. There's a clear trend of consolidation, driven by traditional corporations, but also startups. If you look at what Nubank is doing, what Creditas is doing, when you see Nubank, basically acquiring a corretora de valores, this is great, isn't it? A startup acquiring a kind of a traditional company. So this M&A thing, last year, when the numbers are huge, I think we will see the same with a significant increase this year. which indicates that we will see some sort of consolidation in the Brazilian market. No? A trend that outside of Brazil is already happening for a few years. This is relatively new. You see players like BTG Pactual every week they are acquiring a new company, right? So this is very promising and interesting too. So I think those two movements are very interesting for early investors like us. This is great. It brings back liquidity quicker. We can recycle the capital. The efficiency of that capital investment increases. So it's great also.
That's fantastic. It's really exciting to hear that we will probably have more of these exciting years to come. So yep, good, and good to know that the outlook in Latin America in general is the same. I'm sorry, my son just joined us. We have another question here. I think you covered a few of the follow-up questions, but one different one, I would try to put two questions into one is, what do you think the new legal framework for startups in Brazil will bring for the venture capital space in this country? And do you still think that the language is a barrier to attract global venture capitals in Brazil?
I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me? Yes, I think that's okay. No, I mean on the legal framework, it's kind of disappointing. No, I mean the end result is not what we the whole ecosystem expected, but it's clearly an improvement. But I mean, I think we lost a big opportunity to come up with a legal framework that's way more conducive and actually compatible to the size of that industry already. You know? So that's actually the negative point of this year on the startup side. The language barrier, we underestimate the language issues, you know, and when you work for a global company and you do business in local economies, and then you see how huge impact the language issue can play. To me, this is definitely an issue. If I move outside of São Paulo, it's even a bigger issue, right? So this is something entrepreneurs, we need to work this out quite fast, para ontem, right?
Yeah, I totally agree on.
Yeah,
on
I totally
language.
agree, and it's hard to see sometimes. Please go ahead, Stevon. I'm not even supposed to be talking.
No, sorry. No, I mean, the point I was going to make is completely agree on the language point for a number of reasons. I think when you look at the availability of capital in Brazil today on the venture side, most of the local capital is focused on potentially seed investing, but most definitely Series A. You have some of the Series A funds who are now raising pretty sizable opportunity funds to continue supporting their own portfolio once those companies are able to reach, you know, Series C or Series B stage of investment. But the lion's share of that growth equity part of the venture equation is still really allocated by U.S. investors who, one, don't really know Brazil very well, and two, 9 times out of 10 don't speak Portuguese. And so I think the ability to connect with a founder who doesn't speak English, I think is very difficult. And I think it does a lot of harm in preventing a number of great founders who may not have been able to learn English from getting funding. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of local investors, while they're doing their check in terms of the different types of profiles, I think they also check on whether someone speaks English or not, because they know that later funding would potentially be inhibited if you don't have that language. So I think that, you know, for us at ISC, we're huge proponents of trying to increase the access of local capital to avoid this from perpetuating further in the future. Yeah, and I think the only way we can truly avoid that is either one, improve English proficiency, which I think is probably much harder than us ensuring that as many local Brazilian investors have enough capital to invest in their country.
And just one quick note, Marcela, if just to reinforce this, no, this business is a lot more about articulating a story than crunching numbers. You know? So if you are, because of a language issue, if you are not able to articulate your story in an eloquent way, you are behind 20 miles, you know, because other people will manage to do that. So this is really a key issue for a lot of very talented entrepreneurs that are now facing difficulties because articulating the storytelling, you know, is hard in English or in Spanish.
Yeah, that's especially true when we try to burst the bubble, how we usually would say here, when we try to move out of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, when we go local, when we go to the northeastern region of Brazil, to the north, to the south, we really see very good assets, very good startup companies and entrepreneurs that if we want to really reach the peripheric entrepreneurs, the marginalized entrepreneurs, we will have this language as a barrier, definitely, because I'm positive that all of the entrepreneurs here in São Paulo that have Stanford and Harvard MBAs can speak English, but we're really trying to target those that cannot, and that's the biggest difficulty here. Yep, I totally agree. Going back to IPOs, most of the questions here are related to IPOs. So as I said, exits always create some buzz. Do you think this increase, well, this one you already covered. Do you think this increase is happening across Latin America or just in Brazil? And how much does this increase of IPOs in Brazil relate to the fact that Brazilian capital market is more developed than in other countries? So just to, I think Stefan will be good to make a great context here for us that we don't have that much knowledge into Latin America as a whole.
So I think not just in terms of the IPO activity, but I think exits overall. There's a huge discrepancy between what's happening in Brazil versus what's happening in Spanish-speaking Latin America. I think the main reason for that is, you know, when you think of what's happening in the VC ecosystem in Mexico and Colombia is much earlier stage than what you're seeing in Brazil. I think you probably have a 5 to 7 year advantage in the Brazilian context. Most companies that we're seeing in Mexico are one, either fintech plays, or two, companies who are still really at the Series A stage of their development. So I think Mexico is a ways off from truly seeing a strong wave in terms of what exit potential can look like. And to go deeper, you know, when you think about the number of unicorns that exist in Latin America, the majority of them are really in Brazil. In Mexico, you really have, you know, one unicorn, which is Kavak, which is, you know, valued at about $4 billion. And then last week you have another one, Bitso, which is a Bitcoin currency exchange, is also valued at about $2 billion. But when you think about the Brazilian economy, because it's been around for such a longer period of time, you've been able to go through that wave where business has been able to reach the point where you can actually start thinking about an exit rather than an IPO, rather than M&A. But unfortunately, here in Mexico and in Colombia, we haven't reached that point as of yet.
Would you like to add something, Alex?
No, not really. I mean, this issue of companies going public is quite complex. I wouldn't dare tap into the other countries that I'm not really familiar with.
Definitely, thank you. Speaking of unicorns, we know that Brazil we have a female-led unicorn is Nubank, and it's a fintech. Something that I've been reading recently is about the unbanking percentage, I don't know if that's correct in English, but the percentage of unbanked people in Brazil and Latin America. So how do you guys see that as an opportunity of investment? How do you see the opportunity of investing in fintechs, considering that Brazil and Latin America has a very high percentage of unbanked people? You're mute, sorry. Something happened. I think you're still on mute.
Well, maybe I can start really quickly.
Yeah, thank you.
While that happens. I think it's very interesting because when I think about the Mexican market, I would say potentially, 6 out of every 10 startups that are created are fintech focused, which I think speaks to the size of the market opportunity. I think unfortunately, a lot of the fintech startups that I've seen that have been able to get to scale and are being created in the Latin American market are still focused on the same part of the socioeconomic graph. It's really, trying to ensure an easier access to capital to folks who are banked today. So I think there are very few companies who are truly focused on the base of the pyramid, folks who don't have any access to credit whatsoever. I think over time you will see more of those companies being developed, but I fear that one of the key questions that a lot of the fintech entrepreneurs have is, one, is there money to be made in that part of the segment? I would argue that, definitely there is, because, when I think about a significant part of the Mexican economy, about 45, 50% is either at the poverty line or close to the poverty line, yet, they still make up a very sizable economic power block in the country. And it's thinking about how do you create a business model that is as sustainable enough to understand the certain level of unique risk that this segment of the market may have. I think that the bright spot that I've seen recently is, at least in the Mexican context, you've seen a number of companies starting to focus on payroll lending, which I think probably has a much better opportunity to go to different groups of people. I think there are parallels in the U.S. where payroll lenders are working for Walmart, where the majority of people in a Walmart store potentially is lower middle income, lower class, and being able to use their payroll data to find a proxy for who is creditworthy and not creditworthy. I think the big hope for us is that over time, once a certain saturation level for the current fintech products, which are debit cards, credit cards, once there is a de facto winner in that space, then the new generation of entrepreneurs will now start thinking about more of the buy now, pay later applications, which I think works really well for the lower income groups in Brazil and other parts of Latin America.
Thank you.
Please, Marcela.
No, I was just going to say thank you. Let's see if we can hear Alex now.
No, just to add, I think if you look at Brazil, you have a very positive already scenario on the MSME side, so the PJs, as we call here, because of this revolution that happened on the payment space, on the acquiring business. It was a very inefficient play, duopoly, 2 companies, and now you have a bunch of acquirers, sub-acquirers. You do have PagSeguro, Stone, both with their IPO successfully done a few years ago. So in the PME side, the PJ side, I think we really saw a huge improvement in terms of financial inclusion. On the pessoa física side, the individual side, I think we're lagging behind big time. You know, even companies like Nubank, very successful, or Creditas, super successful. I don't think they are actually entering the unbanked space. Right? So look at Creditas. Creditas is basically home equity, car equity. If you go for the unbanked, almost the total number of people will not have the basic papers to apply for a home equity loan, right? So I think on the pessoa física side, there's a lot to be done. What is positive about what is happening in Brazil today with this instant payment thing is that it will bring cash that is actually floating outside the formal electronic payment system in Brazil into the system, right? So then with that, you will be able to understand who is actually buying and transferring money and all of that. You will have a bit more of information on a larger number of people. And then the credit models, and not even credit, I mean, the basic offers, you know, from savings to a simple bank account, a payment solution, a credit product, you will be able to crack that nut in a much more efficient way. So let's see. I'm also positive on that sense. You got that I'm super optimistic in every spectrum.
Bull markets. Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Unfortunately, we're moving towards the end here. We do have to close in 3 minutes. So just a last question that we always get is, I'm an entrepreneur. How do we access you guys? What are you looking for? So what do we do to reach you? Very quickly, just to close, we unfortunately have to stop at 5.
Okay, Sevan, I will start really quick. I think today, for an entrepreneur, this is a fantastic scenario. You have a bunch of VCs, group of organized angel investors out there, right? And that information is public. 10 years ago, you would have to fight to get the contact of someone. That information is public. Do your homework, study who is actually behind that VC, who are the companies that they invested in, reach out those founders and talk to them about the fund, about the VC. So if you do your homework, you will manage to get in touch and to build a relationship. And again, this is about building a relationship. It's not about raising money, right? You don't do that in a 3-month period. You do that on a 2-3 year window. So build the relationship and then you'll be fine.
The only point that I would add is, don't be afraid to cold email people. If you know someone you want to get in touch with, find them on LinkedIn and message them. I think, you know, you'll be surprised the level of, or the amount of people on the investment side who are just very curious of understanding new business models and wanting to also build that network in terms of promising future entrepreneurs. Because I think at the end of the day, it's a win-win game. Entrepreneurs want to be able to find capital to finance their businesses. Investors want to find the next best thing, the next best unicorn. So just as a founder would be desperate to speak to an investor, we're desperate to speak to founders as well. So don't be intimidated by that. And then I think the second thing I would mention is, because it is a relationship business, and because first impressions do matter, there's also a lot of value of potentially first speaking with other entrepreneurs who may be in the same sector as you are or in an adjacent sector, and try to learn from them and understand what are some of the key things that they thought about as they developed their business. Because then with that information, you can then probably have a deeper understanding of what are some of the things you should be speaking with a prospective investor.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for such a rich exchange. This was amazing for me. I hope it was as good to everybody else. And thank you also to everyone who was watching. This engagement was off the chart. I don't think I've ever received this many questions. So thank you very much. I'll switch back to Rebecca and hope you guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you all so much. That was really great. I know we had a number of questions that came in that maybe not all were spoken about, which is amazing. I mean, it shows how interested you all are on these topics. And on that note, we do have other sessions coming up. If you are available, interested, I've dropped into the chat the series page. If you go to that link, you will be able to see past series sessions. There have on-demand videos, so you can tune in and at least catch previous sessions. And then the sessions that are upcoming. Some are in English, like this one. Others are in Portuguese. We do have closed captions attached to all of those sessions. So you should, if you do have an interest and want to attend, you can always follow along that way. So again, the next session coming up is on June 16th, same time, same place. And then we also have on June 30th. So if you're interested, definitely check out our event calendar. We have a few ways that you can find these sessions and more if you're interested in the developer world, startup world, and technology. You can visit us at meetup.com and search for Microsoft Reactors. We are an international program with 12 locations, physical spaces, and right now with everything happening in the world, we are virtual. So if you're not necessarily located close to a location, we do have sessions as long as it works with your time zone. So check it out. We also have, as mentioned in the chat and on the earlier intro, a YouTube channel with on-demand sessions. So not just this series, but many more types of content related to developer can be found there of past sessions as well. If you are interested in becoming part of the Microsoft Reactor community, again, meetup.com. You can visit us at our website, microsoftreactor.com, or even join our newsletter, which goes out just once a month with sessions that are close within your region, aka.ms/reactor email sign up. So on that note, once again, I want to thank everyone for being a part of this. WeVenture, IFC, our speakers today, our moderator, Marcella, thank you. This was wonderful. You all have a great and amazing rest of your day.